Hi, this is Sabrina Peña Young. I am the creator of Libertaria, the virtual opera, and the author of Composer Bootcamp, and this is the Musicality Podcast.
Hi, Christopher here, founder of Musical You, and welcome to the Musicality Podcast, which might need a new name now that it's a video show too, but we're going to call it the Musicality Podcast for now. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with someone I've wanted to have on the show since day one, a longtime collaborator at Musical U and at Easy Ear Training before that, Sabrina Peña Young. Sabrina is an award-winning composer who created the first ever original, fully animated opera, Libertaria. I have long been in awe of the range and scale of projects Sabrina manages to take on and bring to success, and for the first time I got to sit down with her and actually dig into the question of how she manages to do all that she does. Sabrina is certainly someone who people would be quick to call talented or gifted, but I knew from working with her that she had as little belief in the importance of natural talent as I do, so I was utterly curious to know, if it's not talent, how does she do it all? In this conversation, we talk about Sabrina's musical upbringing and how helpful attention to detail can become harmful perfectionism. We talk about the remarkable college environment which transformed who she was as a musician and shaped who she would become as a composer and filmmaker. And we talk about the role that mentors have played in her journey and her advice for aspiring musicians who are also seeking a mentor themselves. With Sabrina's extensive experience and fascinating projects and deep expertise, this conversation was never going to be a short one. And honestly, even after running a bit long, I felt we'd only just scratched the surface. So I'm hoping we'll be seeing Sabrina on the podcast again before too long, and I think after watching this episode, you're going to be feeling the same way. My name's Christopher Sutton, and this is, for now at least, the Musicality Podcast from Musical U. Welcome to the show, Sabrina. Thank you for joining us today.
And thank you for having me.
So I was joking with you by email that it's bizarre to me that you have not been on the show sooner. And I was kicking myself recently when we were doing an episode all about clave and Latin rhythms. And I was just like, why is Sabrina not here with us? This is stupid. Because obviously you've been a really long time collaborator of Musical U and Easy Ear Training before that. And I consider you such an important part of our team. And so I'm really excited to finally have you on the show here with us today. But I realized in preparing for the show that although I know quite a lot about your recent projects, of which there are many and always impress me, I don't actually know all that much about your backstory. So I'd love if we could begin by talking a bit about your own musical background and how you got started in music.
Well, so when I first started playing, I was 10 years old, and I had a choice between taking study hall or band, and I can't sit still, so I decided to take band. And what happened was we had this amazing guy come in. He was this big guy, tattoos, bald, one earring, and he just started jamming on the drums, and he was like incredible. And I said, I want to do that when I grow up. And so I decided to start playing the drums, and so I started playing, the typical thing in band and everything, and then I joined orchestra. And then I just kept playing through high school, and I really, really, really wanted to be a professional orchestra, so I spent hours and hours and hours and hours, just practicing and playing and learning all different kinds of styles of music. I kind of moved away from just being a heavy rock drummer, which would have been cool in the 80s, but maybe not so much now, And eventually I expanded everything to in college, when I went ahead and I ended up studying composition and music technology and started doing film as well.
Gotcha. And you mentioned, spending hours and hours there. What was the process of learning percussion like for you? Were you someone who found it, was always a delight to sit at the drum set, or was it kind of a slog and a grueling challenge to get through your practice each day?
I would say yes.
All of the above.
I would say, I think I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And so I literally would spend, like an hour and a half making sure a cymbal crash sounded just right. Or, I would sit there with a metronome and, instead of spending my summers out with my friends, I'd spend hours in beautiful sunny Florida with beaches in a practice room, just trying to get things done. So I was a little too obsessive with it, I think, because now that I'm older, I realize that, music is enjoyable. It's fun. It's a wonderful experience, and I think I just got a little too much into the nuances. I mean, I think, practicing triangle, playing eighth notes on a triangle for 45 minutes, there are so many better things I could have done with my time. And I did get better, but I also burnt out. So in college, I burnt out entirely because it's only sustainable, that kind of, it's only sustainable for a while before your brain shuts off and says, I can't do this anymore. And so I think that I kind of pushed myself too hard. And I actually had a lot of friends that had played as long as I had, that we all burnt out about the same time. And so I kind of had to reintroduce myself to music and performance. I had to drop it for a couple years. Just studied composition, worked on composition, writing music, writing songs, doing music technology and electronic music and audio engineering. And then kind of, eased back into playing, to where, honestly, when I perform and I play, I actually just did a Christmas thing the other day at my church, jamming away at the drum set and stuff again. And, it's just enjoyable now. It's just fun. It's just, it's an expression of myself, but it's not this big stressful nervous breakdown kind of thing anymore. So that's really good.
Gotcha. I'd love to dig into that a little bit, if we may, just because I know that perfectionism and the challenge of how repetitive and systematic to be in your practice versus, enjoying the process of learning music. I know those are two things that can be really challenging, particularly for adult musicians who are coming at it with a lot of background in different kinds of learning, some of it musical, some of it not. So what was the reaction to that perfectionism growing up from your parents or from your teachers? What was the kind of environment that led to you being so diligent and focused like that?
Well, I'm like a third generation musician. So my grandmother was a professional opera singer in Cuba. And then my mom was also a pianist, but she just played for church and things like that. She didn't do it professionally. My sister's also a professional musician. And she's in Ohio. She's a music educator primarily, but she's a vocalist and a pianist. She was even more dedicated than I was. She used to wake up at 6 a.m. and play her scales for 2 hours before she went to high school, like that kind of thing. I also feel like pianists have a tendency to be, I'm a drummer, like, for me, half of it's a lot of fun. I mean, playing on a drum set, even, for 2 hours is fun, even if it is a little, crazy. But playing like the hand and etudes for that long is crazy. We had an environment that really, it was a home environment it was very important to be excellent at what you did. You had to be good at it. My dad's a perfectionist. He's an engineer. He's a very good engineer. He's designed incredible houses. And my mom had the love of music. And so it just kind of combined for both myself and for my sister, where we just kind of got it. So it was very much a very focused environment. And then, of course, educators and teachers, once you get to high school, you're thinking about music scholarships and going to college. And so it kind of promotes that kind of thing where you practice and practice and practice. And I think one of the negative things about it is a tendency to compare yourself to others way too much. Where, you sit there and you have let's say you have this big solo, or you have this thing that you did, or just even a small part, and you're just sitting there going, man, I could have done that better because I know so-and-so did it better, and it kind of becomes this obsessive thing where instead of enjoying the performance, you're just constantly comparing yourself and saying, oh, somebody else is doing it better, I need to do it better. And that's a perfectionist part of it. And I think that's the part that kind of damages you as a person, because you become more focused on that and comparing yourself to others. And there will always be somebody better, because that's just the way life is. And that doesn't mean that you need to tear yourself down or give up, or force yourself to practice like 10 hours a day, to where you're it's a detriment to yourself. So I think that on the one hand, it's good that I'm detail oriented, because I do compose large works and things like that. On the other hand, I think that it's a balance. I think one of the easiest ways to balance things is to have kids.
You can't help
because
it.
all of a sudden you're sitting there going, I really want to write an opera, but I have to change diapers. And so all of a sudden there's this reality. And then, and in college, I had some health problems and some family issues going on that really slowed me down in terms of what I could do performance wise. And it kind of really made me have to drop everything that I loved for a while I tried to deal with, just the basics of getting myself back on track, as a person and as a human being. And I think I kept doing music throughout it all. Music will always be what I go to, during any stage of my life. So I think that, yeah, I'm still a perfectionist. I'm a recovering perfectionist. But I'm also more forgiving of myself. And I also realize that, hey, it doesn't have to be the best of the best of the best. I don't have to sit here and compare myself to like these imaginary people that I never meet that I think are better than me. I really just need to do as best as I can right now, and just enjoy the process. I mean, life is so short. Like, there's just no reason to stress about it.
Yeah, it's so interesting hearing you talk through that because, obviously we know you now as someone who's had great success at a high level as a musician and a composer. And it's always hard to know, for me anyway, what degree of perfectionism is a necessary evil. And, when I look back on my own journey, I can relate to a lot of what you just said. My high school environment was a fairly serious kind of classical music style music department, and everything was, let's ace the exams, let's perform it note perfect, let's aim for excellence. And it took me a long time to realize that actually, I had felt like a mediocre musician throughout that period. And when I stepped out into the real world, I realized actually I was a pretty good musician in a lot of ways.
Exactly.
And still today in my work, there are things I take for granted in terms of rhythm or pitch or music theory that I learned, as an 8-year-old and have always had. And I see people struggling to learn it as adults, and I just count my blessings that I was in that really, excellence-oriented music learning environment. But on the flip side, I felt mediocre throughout that, and it was very frustrating. And it would, as you say, it affects your identity. And it took me a long time to feel comfortable identifying as a musician, because to me, I was always the guy kind of budging it, while the guys that were really good at music or were really natural in music were able to do it easily. So I struggle to decide how much of that kind of thing is a good thing and how much harm it does. I think, yeah, maybe the word you mentioned there, balance, is the key one.
No, I agree. And I think it's kind of interesting, too, because I had shared with you earlier that like I had played in drumline, and my senior year, I was expected to take on the head of the drumline, and I was told I couldn't because I was a girl, and they didn't think the girl could handle the boys. And that actually, for something so small, I mean, now that you think about it years later, it actually kind of wrecked my life at that time. And made me change my course to where I said, okay, well, you know what? I'm just going to focus on going to college and being the best percussionist I can be. And just really just honed in on focusing on my music. And unfortunately, I've had to deal with that, numerous times where, and I think that does affect you, where you're sitting there going, I'm going to play drum set, but I know that, or I'm going to play whatever, and I know that I have to be really, really good, because if I'm mediocre, they're going to say, oh, that's because it's a girl. And even though that's not the situation today, that was the situation I had growing up. And so it kind of sits back there where you're sitting there going, well, am I a good musician? I don't know if I know what I'm doing. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing, And like the other day, I'm just playing drum set, playing White Christmas. I mean, it's a simple jazz tune. And I'm sitting there going, man, I hope I can do this. And I'm like, I did this like, I was like 12 and I could do this. Like, it's not really, it's like, it's not even that difficult. But because, that self-doubt just keeps creeping in there for whatever reason, it can affect how you perform and how you feel about the performance. So I did have a good time, by the way. It was a blast. But yeah, it was one of those things that I'm just sitting there going, can I play White Christmas? Well, of course I can play White Christmas. Like, it's ta 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 ta. How hard is that? So anyway, but yeah.
Yeah, that little voice in your head never goes away completely, does it?
No.
So you mentioned there that in college, as you turned your attention away a little bit from
Hmm.
performance and instrument technique, you got into the music technology side of things. Can you talk a little
Yes.
bit about that? And I guess, what are we
Mhm.
talking here? I don't want to cause offense, but I guess we're talking about the early 2000s, are we?
Yes,
Okay.
that's good. We'll just keep it around there.
Yeah.
A lady never tells her age. Okay.
So what was
Anyway,
music technology like, and what was it that got you excited?
it was actually kind of a really great time to be a musician in music technology because we were at our school. We were a public university. I was at University of South Florida at the time. I had taken composition lessons earlier at another school with Dr. Claire Shore, where she's an excellent composer, really writes lots of choral music. She actually still helped with like Libertaria, and she's still a part of my life because she's just this mentor that stayed with me this entire time. But then I transferred to University of South Florida, and they have a technology department there. It's called psychhome, which is a system complex for the performing arts. But it's also just a really crazy group of creative visual artists and musicians, and we just get together and do really crazy experimental music. And it was a great time because we were just transitioning from we still had a giant emu and all this analog synthesizers and everything. We still had a basic studio with, microphone and everything, but we also had a digital workstation. And so I got to learn how to, patch chords and all this kind of thing and create sounds and do basic sound synthesis and audio engineering with analog and then also with digital. And then by the time I got to graduate school at Florida International, where I was studying with Dr. Christine Burns, it was all digital at that point. But because I had a chance to learn analog first, I was able to understand the digital in an entirely different way. It wasn't just clicking around. It wasn't just, hitting buttons. It wasn't just copying a loop over and over again. I understood the processes behind. I remember that I had first learned, sitting there and taking a patch cord and going, okay, I got to turn in, put it here and plug it into there and then plug it into here. And then, at the end of it, we did, I remember one day we got this ancient 1970s synthesizer that fits a room. We got to do techno music. And it wasn't supposed to do techno music. And my professor was not happy with us. Because he's like, what are you guys doing? And we're like, yeah, boom, 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 boom. We're like, look what we did. And he's like, no, that's not. And we were like sitting there playing with the lights and having a rave in the middle of this thing. And he's just sitting there going, no. I think we disappointed him that day. But yeah, so it was just a great chance. And then because it was so experimental, we just did whatever we wanted. And then we collaborated with visual artists and filmmakers. And that's when I first started getting interested in visual imagery and film and things like that. And just kind of realizing that, music is powerful and visual images are powerful. And when you put them together, they're this crazy force that just, audiences just, I don't know, it's just a different experience. And so I started incorporating imagery or collaborating with people. I even collaborated with dancers and things like that. And that kind of formed kind of a background for some of my later work.
Interesting. Okay, there's two things there that I really want to unpack, and one of them is you mentioned mentors, and I've
Yes.
always been conscious with you. You're very quick to name the people who have helped you and
Yes.
guided you, in your book acknowledgements,
Yes.
in your website, anytime you're writing a press release and that kind of thing. You're always quick to call out the people you admire and appreciate who've influenced you. And
Mm-hmm.
this has come up a few times on the podcast, this question of mentorship or having a coach or a guide. And I know you've also, I believe, played this role in a few
Mm-hmm.
websites where people can get songwriting coaching and that kind of thing, or advice on
Mm-hmm.
their career. I'd love to
Yes.
just hear your perspective on mentorship in music learning. What does it mean to be a mentor, and how does it help a musician?
I think, having a mentor, I think is why I am where I am today. Because, and it wasn't just the people in college, like, I had several, instructors, but I had one in particular, his name was Jed Davis, and he still, teaches drumline and all kinds of things and percussion in South Florida. And he has taught so many percussionists. I think every percussionist in South Florida has studied with him. It's just to be able to work with someone who has done the journey, who loves and has a passion for music and is able to kind of impart that to you. And not only that, but cares for you as a person. And I think that that's a difference between somebody just being your piano teacher and somebody being a mentor. It's somebody that sits there and goes, you did a great job on this and this and this and stuff, but how are you really doing? And I think for myself, because I had a lot of family issues growing up, I kind of latched on to different people, and looked up to them, professionally, and then also just as somebody to look up to for encouragement, and just saying, okay, this is going on in my life. Am I going to make it through this? And they're like, oh yeah, you can, let's do this. I've done this before, and that kind of a thing. I was very fortunate because I had two women that were composers that were my mentors. In the States, that's very unusual. Even today, there's not a lot of women that are promoted to areas of like professorships in the United States. And so there's more now than there were when I was growing up. But like Dr. Shore, she was the first female to get, I believe, a composition degree from Juilliard, and she's gone over these massive hurdles in her life, and then to be able to kind of follow on. I remember Dr. Burns, she just did some incredible things. She did an opera as well. She did a children's opera. In fact, I want to do a children's opera soon, and I think it's kind of funny that I'm paralleling, some of those things. But she also had to deal with some things too as well, and she started her family later in life, and I kind of inadvertently, I had one child and then I had to wait a while to have another one. And it's just kind of funny to, sit here as a professional and be like, okay, I'm writing music, and I'm also, I'm still potty training, or, that kind of thing. So, it's good to have people that are a little farther along and, can kind of show you the path and show you that it is possible. And then the nice thing about it is then you can make your own path, and you can try to create new things, and then you can mentor people underneath you. And so, yes, I've mentored probably, I think through different, websites and online things and consulting and things, like over 150 musicians, I think, at this point, and different levels of all different things. And, really, I just try to help people see that, where they are is fine. And just, you can get to where you want to go. And it might not be tomorrow. You have to give yourself time and patience and realize life is life. And, sometimes, you want to do this big project, but you might have to wait a few months, or maybe you get to do it right away. And then what, because that's the other problem as a musician. You're like, oh, I just accomplished something great. Now what? Because you kind of get that high of like, yeah, performance, it was awesome. Woo! And then you get home the next day and you're like eating Cheerios and you're like, my life. What do I do with my life now? And it's kind of that crazy, mountaintop experience. The next day you're like, I'm in the valley. I don't know what to do. And so it's just good to have a mentor. And I think also, I think it's important for people to mentor others, even if you are not as far along as you think you would, even if you feel like you're not that great of a musician. I think you can always find somebody that, you can inspire and you can encourage. And even if it's a peer where you just like encourage them and they encourage you and you guys move together in your journey. But I think it's important that we remember that there is community in music, and that we all work together to create something wonderful. And that we don't get stuck in the practice room and just forget about life and about anything and about, everybody else. It's not just about me being good. It's about what can I do to help others. So that's kind of my idea about that.
Amazing. That was a really wonderful description. And what you said just at the end there reminded me a bit of my conversation recently with Josh Wright on the podcast, who's a high-level classical pianist, and he was talking about his mentor and how one of the roles she performed for him was helping rein in his tendency to go too far down a rabbit hole and, lose sight of what his taste in music should be or could be or would best be, and just kind of reset his perspective a little. And I think that's what you touched on at the end there, that there are, a wiser, broader set of eyes that can look at your musical life and help you kind of figure out what's going on. So I do feel obliged to ask on behalf of the listener, that mentor relationship sounds amazing. How do you find a mentor?
Well, I think obviously if you are fortunate enough to be in a student-teacher relationship, you're taking lessons somewhere, or even, if it's somebody online you're taking lessons with, or like even if you are maybe in a community group or a band or a church orchestra kind of thing, usually there's going to be somebody there that you are going to kind of just, I don't know, hit it off with. So I think that that's probably the easiest way, is that if you are already in sort of a relationship where, you're playing and they're the director or they're your teacher or something like that, I think that's the easiest way, but not everybody has that. So I suggest, not just, playing music in a vacuum. Don't just stay at home and say, I'm playing piano and I'm good at it and that's it. Go out and meet other musicians, jam with other musicians. The great thing is that we have this thing called the internet now, and we can find out if there's like a group of, like if there's a drum circle going on, we can find out, hey, there's a drum circle going on like next Saturday, and then you head there. And then I think it's just really being open and just building relationships. And eventually you will find that there'll be people that maybe are a little bit farther along than you are, that you'll hit it off with. If you're younger, and usually an older mentor helps, but even if you're an adult, usually it's somebody that may be a peer age-wise, but they're somebody that maybe they've done a little bit more than you have, and they can kind of, you can kind of talk to them and talk shop. I'm in the film community here in the area, and we have a Facebook page, and everybody's constantly writing, hey, I had this really great idea for a movie. What do I do now? And, everybody just pipes in, and just says, hey, do this, do that, call so-and-so, do this. Don't forget to do that, and I think that, online communities are really great, because you can really just touch base with people from all over the world that have all kinds of experience. And I think that that's also another way to build a mentorship as well. I don't think, the word mentor is kind of loaded where we think of like this great person with this massive brain that's just like, oh, I know what I'm doing. But that's not really what it is. It's just somebody that cares about you that's maybe a little farther along in their journey. And it's a very basic definition. And I think almost anybody can find someone, but you just have to be open to it, just realize, and then you also have to be able to take criticism or take suggestions. And so some people may not be secure enough in that. And then you just need to get over that. If somebody's saying, hey, I liked how you did that, but you could do this, just say, great, thank you. That's just some free advice that you didn't ask for to make you a better musician. So I think that that's a big part of it too, to be able to take constructive criticism, or even not so constructive criticism, and just plain, honesty. And so just take that and be able to kind of move forward with that as well.
And would you explicitly ask them, hey, will you be my mentor? Or is it more of an organic thing generally, would you say?
It's always been organic for me. Like I know, my drum instructor growing up and stuff, like I looked up to him. I still look up to him. We're on Facebook friends, and Dr. Shore, Dr. Burns, you just keep looking up to them, and it just happens. I never really asked them, can you be my mentor? It just kind of happens one day where you're like, oh my gosh, this is my mentor. And you didn't really realize it, but then you see what they've done in your life and how they've impacted you, and how they've influenced your journey. And I think that that's, a big part of it as well.
Very cool. So two things you said there actually loop back to the other big thing I wanted to pull out of your talking about your university experiences. One was community, you talking there about being part of a community, and the other was criticism and feedback from other people. And what I wanted to bring out was actually the number one thing I wanted to ask you in this interview, or try and get an answer to, which is you are an astonishing mystery to me in the degree to which you can produce incredible projects year after year. I've known you at this point, I think, for nearly a decade. And
yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
I'm constantly amazed by what you work on and what you manage to accomplish. And that, in a sense, to me, is in juxtaposition with the childhood story you just shared of being a perfectionist, being kind of rigid in your music learning and kind of doing things the way they're meant to be done. And what really jumped out to me there was that I think maybe that university period is the crux of it, of how someone who came from that background became someone who is so creative and so, from my perspective, fearless in the projects she takes on. Because when you were describing that, that melting pot of creativity and experimental things and projects, I'll be honest, like, I got nervous. I was like, I would not be comfortable in that environment. I would be worrying, like, I don't want to experiment. I might get it wrong. Like, am I good enough to collaborate with that visual artist? Like, that to me is not something I've dived into in my own life. And so I am much more kind of straight-laced and restricted, really, when it comes to my musical creativity. And so I'd love to hear you talk a bit more about that and the impact it had on you in terms of where you were coming from and where you went on to go in your music career.
Well, yeah, it was crazy. It was a crazy time and a good time. We at University of South Florida, they have like I said, this group called psychhome. I believe it's still, it's this they had all the electronic musicians in like this basement, which in Florida you don't have very many basements. And it was like this bunker that was meant to be like a bomb shelter, like way back in the day or something. Like it was some sort of weird story. So you'd shut this door and you were just stuck in this basement and you would just create music. And it was great. We were like the mole people. Like we just were crazy people that did this insane stuff. And I think and I was it was headed up by Paul Reller at the time, and he was at that time I think he was in his 30s, and he was very experimental in his work, and he wrote big pieces and small pieces, acoustic pieces, electronic pieces, but he just really forced us as a group of students to just kind of take our ideas and then just take it to the next level, and to really just force ourselves to kind of have, to make ourselves have no boundaries whatsoever. I know sometimes people say, oh, well, I'm a little outside the box. And I say, well, I don't even believe in the box in the first place. There is no box. It's in your head. And so I think that was a great opportunity. We used to have these concerts every year. And the concerts would, we lose like half our audience because we were so experimental that people were like, that's not music, and they'd leave. And we'd cheer. We're like, yes, we've succeeded. We are the avant-garde. In fact, it was a joke that we'd always lose the head of the music department, like whoever it was, would just leave after 20 minutes. And we're like, yes, we are the true, And we were like really hardcore about what we believed in and what we did. And, but yeah, I think it was really great for somebody like me that was a perfectionist, that, was classically trained, that had been in orchestra, to kind of sit there and go, okay, so you're on a skateboard and we've got some footage of rabbits, and I'm going to write some music. I'm going to write some music to this, and we can do this. And I'm not kidding. We actually had one concert where we took a guy in this really dilapidated rabbit suit that looked terrible. Like he looked like he'd been run over. And we took him all the way around town. And then everybody synced their electronic music as a soundtrack to this guy in a rabbit suit running around. And that was something we did. I don't do that anymore. But it still affects my work. So a lot of my work will have all of a sudden these sections that are very experimental, very out there. And Paul Reller also was a percussionist, just like me. And I think that was another part of being a composer that's a percussionist. I think in terms of timbre and rhythm and sound, even instrumentation, orchestration, color. And so since Paul was also a percussionist, he kind of encouraged those things in me. So I think that that's a difference between maybe some of my writing and maybe somebody else's writing. A lot of the composers I know, a lot of them are pianists. Some of them are singers, and I think with a pianist, the nice thing about a pianist who's playing, like writing music, whether it's songs or whether it's a, full blown, some big orchestra kind of thing, is that, their instrumentation is, they have harmony, they have rhythm, they have melody. And while, with instruments like the marimba, you have some harmony, I don't really think in terms of harmony. And when I put harmony in things, I think more in terms of, well, I want it to sound creepy, or I want it to sound this way or that way. And I don't really think of, okay, well, let me sit down, if I have a chord, what comes right after that. And I might follow some traditional, vertical writing, and then I'll just totally leave it and say, okay, well, what I really want. And I think that's why some of my music sounds a little bit different than some other people's music. And so in college, I got a chance to really experiment with that. I was in the percussion ensemble at University of South Florida is nationally known in the United States. It's a really, really good program under Bob McCormick. And what happens with them, they just do all kinds of music, every kind of music you could possibly think of. And so that really gave me an opportunity to kind of expand who I was as a composer through my percussion playing as well. And so I would learn something new in percussion, and then I'd apply it in my next piece that I wrote. And so it was kind of neat how that kind of just fed into each other. And then, like I said, I started taking classes. I took classes in Photoshop. I took classes in film. I took a class in science fiction and fantasy film, which was actually a real class, where I just sat there and we got to watch sci-fi movies for like a half a semester or whatever, and that was it. And so it's one of those things that, that's where I started kind of combining everything. And I think also what was nice is that we also had like a big musical theater piece as well. And so every year, at least once or twice a year, the theater department, the music department, and the visual arts department, we get together and do these massive collaborations, whether it was an opera or a musical, or just something else that was just this big piece that was nice to see everybody working together. Because in many schools, the musicians are here, the artists are there, the filmmakers are there, the writers are here, and nobody collaborates. And because everybody was kind of enmeshed with each other, it kind of helped form who I was later as a composer, I think. So
That's really interesting. So I think when
yeah.
we first started working together, you were a celebrated avant-garde composer, and I was definitely a bit intimidated by that, and certainly felt guilty asking you to, compose a basic three-chord pop song for some of our training
That was
material
fun though.
and that kind of thing. I felt like
Yeah.
I was not leveraging your talents to the best. But I think, as impressed as I was, it was your Libertaria project that really hit home for me. Wow, she is doing some incredible things. So I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about that, because it seemed like a bit of a leap, even for an experimental composer, to do a project like Libertaria. That's not an obvious career trajectory. So tell us how that came to be, and we should probably explain for the listeners who haven't seen the movie, what is Libertaria?
Right. Okay, well, Libertaria is it's an animated science fiction opera, and you can actually watch it on YouTube. You can watch it on Amazon, and actually one of the reasons I created it was so that way everybody can enjoy it for free on the internet. Opera is kind of this thing that seems like you have to dress up really stodgy and get these really expensive tickets, and nobody talks and everybody just kind of stares and politely claps, and I just wanted to change that because it's a 21st century and things are changing so rapidly. So Libertaria is an animated opera, and it's a science fiction opera, and it's crazy. But it actually had roots in an oratorio that I'd written. I had written when my daughter was actually when I was pregnant with her. Actually, I got a commission from, oh gosh, was it Millikan University? I think it was. And was it Millikan or was it Kansas State? I think it was Millikan University. And they had commissioned me to write an oratorio, which is a giant choral piece, is essentially what it is. So I did this giant choral piece. It was 50 women's chorus, percussion ensemble, synthesizer. I had animation. It was called the Creation Oratorio. And the animation was it was based on the creation story, but I also had been pregnant at the time, so it kind of intertwined the idea of being pregnant and having a baby with, the creation story, the 7 days or whatever. And it also had a lot of sci-fi, so a lot of the creatures were like very weird looking, bald, alien looking things. Anyway, so it was this great piece. I mean, it was, standing room only, standing ovation. It was just performed at this church. It was incredible. And it was just an amazing experience. But I have never seen it in its entirety again. And that broke my heart. Now, I have had people ask me to do arrangements of it. So I've done many arrangements of this particular piece for all kinds of different ensembles. And there's a couple of the songs from there that have actually done pretty well on their own as standalone pieces. But as for it being done as a single oratorio, I don't think it's ever, I mean, at least to my knowledge, it's never been done like I was the first time. And that broke my heart because it was a year and a half of my time spent writing this piece. And, and I feel like it was my first real masterpiece. Like, you kind of have these pieces in your life where you're just like, that was a really good one. And I feel like that was my very first one where I was like, hey, I think I'm a composer. And so even though I'd done many other pieces, that was the one that I was like, oh my gosh, I think I know what I'm doing. So I wanted to try to create something new that it could be replicated, that it could be experienced not just by, a couple hundred people or whatever and standing there and enjoying this, you want to, or it wouldn't be limited by the size of your auditorium. It wouldn't be limited by, okay, well, can we practice this for 8 months? It wouldn't be limited by, oh, well, we don't do electronic with voice. It's too hard or, that kind of a thing. So I decided, well, I want to do an opera. And I'm like, well, what if I did it like a film? Because I always wanted to do film too. And I'm married to a coach, an amazing guy who is very supportive of my work and is right now with the baby. So he also, as a coach, we moved around the country a lot. And so because of that, when you have an opera, you have to have like an opera company and you have to kind of be in one spot and you have to have all these connections and, otherwise, and it's a very expensive kind of a project. It could cost 6 figures, especially since, of course, I didn't want to do something easy that was like, oh, one person. It was like this massive epic with like, tons of this huge cast members and there's explosions and spaceships. And anyway, so obviously it was going to cost a lot of money. So I decided instead to try to do an internet collaboration. And so what I did was, and I had done some animation with a program called Movie Storm, which was, it's called a machinima kind of animation. Essentially, you don't have to create all the characters from scratch. You create some of the characters, you create them in an environment, and then you kind of direct them like you would direct, let's say, a regular actor. So you could tell your character, hey, I want you to sing this and then run around in circles, and then, you type it in and figure it out, and it does it. And so I decided to use that program to create the cast, in terms of all the splendor of this insanity. And so what I did was I put out calls online. I had people from as far away as Europe and South America audition. And we ended up, the funny thing is we started out with one cast of about 12 people, and we ended up with another cast of about 15 because half the people had to quit halfway through. And there was just, the process itself took about 2.5 years, I think. And so I would audition people online. And I actually created these audition packs where essentially you could download an album with the click track for your voice type and all the scores. And then you could download that for free. And then you can practice with that. And then that'd be the files. So we had the cast members send me files. I had 1,000 audio files that I had to go through. Because I had some musicians, I had Perry Cook and Matt Meadows. They were both doing the lead of Simi, and I had to I for each part, each of the main roles had at least two people. I had two people in them, so I would mix the two vocal takes together. So it was kind of interesting because it gave each character a very interesting range, and I even had a character sing a duet with himself, which is you wouldn't do live. So. But some of them, and then I would have, for example, Perry went ahead and, for one of the songs, he sent me, all these incredible takes in different dialects, like different accents and voices. And then I was able to mix that and create an entire choir of soldiers from his like 8 takes. And I was able to kind of replicate it and make it like 20, or so. And so that kind of thing happened. So it was a big endeavor in terms of just the mixing. And then by the end of it, what I ended up doing was I ended up hiring somebody to do the final master because by then it was like 2 years in, my ears were shot. I couldn't tell. Everything sounded the same. And I no longer had the ability to kind of differentiate between, well, that was a good take or a bad take, or does that work? I have no idea anymore. What are the levels? I don't know. So he finished it up. But at the same time, I was also doing the animation with a group of 3 other women. And so we created the animation. At the end, one dropped out, and so I had to kind of animate, 20 minutes that I hadn't expected, which in animation, that's a lot of animation. And then by the end of it, we mixed it all together. We premiered it down in South Florida. And Dr. Claire Shore actually was the one that actually arranged for that premiere. I think that was October 2013. And then after that, it has been shown all over the world. It was shown at Opera America in New York City. It's been shown at film festivals. It's been shown at music festivals. The album's out there. It's on YouTube. It's on other websites as well. So it's done very well. I gave a TED Talk on it as well. So it's kind of interesting, but yeah, it's kind of an unusual, like I never thought, growing up from, being that little girl being like, I want to be a rock drummer because that's what's cool, heavy metal. To being like, yeah, I'm gonna do an animated sci-fi opera. That sounds great. Like, it's just kind of a weird, that's not really what you want to say when you grow up. So now it's kind of interesting because, I'm kind of known for this one thing. And so I have a lot of people, contact me about doing an opera for them or whatever. And actually right now, I might be working on, a collaboration with somebody from Australia. We're trying to figure it out. It's kind of hard now because I have 2 kids and, time being the way time is, because at that time I just didn't sleep all the time. That's how I managed to do that. When I did Libertaria, I never slept. And now that I have 2 kids and my son's definitely much different than my daughter, sleep is very important. So I have not been able to do that as much as I would like, but I'm hoping to do that project at least on a smaller scale. And then I'm also, I've been working in pre-production for a children's opera, and I want to do that one also. Part live action, part animation. It's actually going to be more of a comic book opera. And so I kind of want to do that. I don't know if there's been other comic book operas, but I want to try to do one. I don't know if there are other ones, but because I know with Libertaria, it was the first one with machinima animation, and it might have been, and it's one of the only like original animated operas. There are animated operas that are like Mozart or something, but as for somebody creating an opera and then animating it, it's probably one of the only ones ever done. So yeah, I think I want to do a comic book opera next.
Amazing. Well, I definitely want to circle back and talk about the fact that you took on this complete other role of filmmaker for that project. You weren't just composing
just
an opera
just
because you could. But I have this really vivid memory. I'm a big sci-fi fan, and so I was eagerly awaiting the release of Libertaria, and my wife and I set up our movie projector and we watched it. It was it was such a vivid memory for me. It was fantastic. And I remember at the time I was just blown away that this was something that people had made in their own homes, collaborating over the internet, and in particular that you had kind of spearheaded this, both in terms of composing all the music, obviously, but also organizing a project of this scale. And I think having heard a bit of your backstory now, it makes a bit more sense in my head that you had been in an environment where people did just do these audacious projects and not even think twice about it. But I wanted to kind of rein in that sense of what it means to compose for a minute, because that is an epic project and it's been such a huge success and really made a mark. But I know that some people listening are like, I couldn't even write one page of music, let alone, 40 minutes or an hour to be an opera and animate. Like that was probably blowing their minds right now, as it did mine when I watched it. So let's just come back a notch or two, because you said something interesting a few minutes ago, that with the creation oratorio, that was a moment where you're like, oh, maybe I can be a composer. And I'd love to just unpack that a little bit, because it's such a loaded word. And, we've already talked about coming from a classical music background. And that obviously has huge history and connotations of what it means to be a composer. But it's also this very generic, versatile word that we can apply to any kind of music creating. So I wonder, particularly because you have really kind of tackled this subject head on with your book, Composer Bootcamp, I'd love to hear your perspective on what does that word mean, what should that word mean, and how can the people listening explore what the role of composer could be for them?
Definitely. I think you're right. It's a very loaded word. I think, for example, when I went to college, nearly every composer I studied was, had been dead for a very long time, was European, was male. And I think I only studied 2 female composers, and that was because of a famous male composer. And I also only studied 2 non-European composers, and that was only because they were friends with the professor. So he mentioned them in class, and he talked about them. And so I think that, we kind of have this idea that all composers must be these stodgy, old guys. They're very dead. They're not around anymore. They wore powdered wigs. And that's, they wrote for kings. I mean, that's, I don't write for kings. I wish I did. It'd be great. It'd be great. Any kings listening, hire me. Anyway, I'm sure there's lots of kings on
That's a whole other podcast.
Right?
Yeah.
Monarchs, yeah, Anyway, but yeah, so it's one of those things that, it's this, and it was an engine, and it was this, creation of music within this very specific system. But nowadays, especially today, I mean, even when I started doing composition, at that time, like I said, we were going from analog to digital. The internet was, just becoming, it had been around, but it wasn't really a thing of collaboration yet. It was more of a, hey, I got an email from a weird guy kind of thing still. And so it was one of those things that, we really weren't exploring all the things that we could do. And the amazing thing today, I really feel like, our definition of composer needs to be expanded so much more than, dead guy who writes symphonies. Like, I think, if you are sitting there and you're jamming and you write this song, even if you don't write it down and you just record it, or you just, play it and you play it for some friends, you're composing. I think that, if you are playing the piano and you're like, hey, I want to try to play with these chords a little bit, you're composing. I think that a lot of times composing can just be, improvising, jamming, experimenting, expressing yourself musically. And it doesn't necessarily have to be this really really complicated thing that's written on paper and handed to a conductor and, played in a symphony hall. It's something very basic. And I think what's interesting is that in Western society specifically, we kind of assign composer as a very specific job, a very specific person. It's funny because, I'm in a lot of parenting groups because I'm a mom, and, I don't tell people I'm a composer. I kind of keep it as a secret identity thing. And then people are like, oh, blah, blah. And eventually it comes to, oh, I'm a composer. And they're like, you're a composer? And I'm like, yes, as I have spit up on me and I have my hair's a mess and I'm wearing like a, yoga pants. And I'm like, yes, the baby's here. And I'm like, yes, I'm a composer. Yeah, I'm like, what did you think composers were? And so I think that, we kind of need to move past this, even those famous composers from back then, when you look at their lives, I think it was Bach who had like 20 kids and some of them had disabilities and he taught them piano because he wanted to, like, things like that we really don't think about, them as people. We kind of idolize them and say, oh, Mozart. Yeah, Mozart had a pretty crappy life, it's just, you look at them and they're people. They're not these crazy, godlike characters. And so I think that we need to kind of take composers off their pedestal. And I think right now half the composers are going, oh my gosh, yes, we need to get off of our pedestal, like take us off and just put us there with everybody else. In fact, my sister who, like, her name is Christina and she's over in Ohio. Christina's always telling me, she teaches composition to 10-year-olds. And it used to be that composition and ear training and music theory and playing was all part of learning how to be a musician. It wasn't this strange thing. And in other societies, people create music naturally. Like you have people that, they just, my family, like I said, half of my mom's side of the family is from Cuba. And, everybody there is playing the drums and singing and dancing. And it's just an expression of hope and joy and just sheer expression. And nobody's calling themselves a composer. They might be a composer. They might be creating things from scratch that nobody's ever heard of before, and they're incredible, but they're just expressing themselves. And I think that we kind of need to kind of get away from that term a little bit sometimes, while also respecting that there are people that make these incredible things that you're like, wow. But I also think that, anybody can be a composer if they wanted to be. And that's kind of why I created the Composer Bootcamp, which I'll show you right now. Composer Boot Camp. But that's why I created that. What I did was I took a lot of the exercises and things that I've been teaching for years, and I kind of compiled it into just very practical exercises. And some of them are meant for people that, don't have any musical background whatsoever or barely any, so they can't read music or they don't have music theory. And they're mostly like, prompts, like, creative prompts to go ahead and kind of get an idea to write music or jam and there's encouragement to have community and to do things with groups and to not just do things by yourself. It's also for intermediates, people that maybe have music theory or college students and that kind of thing. And then also there's exercises there for people that maybe they've done this for a very long time and they just want to do something that challenges them. And so there's like a handful of exercises as well for that kind of thing. But the main reason I made that is to kind of take the mystique out of composing. I don't think that we need to sit there and go, well, I'm not a composer. I can't do that. I don't think that's possible. I think anybody can do it. I think, if you've only been playing for 6 months, I think you can compose music. And I think what's interesting is that, I have a couple friends that I keep, I'm like, they play piano or they sing or whatever. And I'm like, you gotta write music. You have to write music. And they're like, no, I can't do that. It's so hard. I'm like, you improvise every week. You do this every week. You can sing. You can do that. You understand this. Like, write music. Like, you can do it. It's not that hard. I mean, it is hard, but it's not hard. Like, you just have to learn the skills and then it's there, So I think that it's very important that, performers and musicians like that, whether they can read or not read, that they explore creating music. If we went away from being like composing music and just saying creating music, I think that it's a much better description of what you do. It's not just you're composing and sitting there and, and so you're creating music. And if you think of it as creating music instead of just composing it, I think that people would understand it. Because if you're like, oh, do you improvise? Do you jam? Do you create music? I think people are like, oh yeah, I totally do that. But if you're like, do you compose? Oh no, I don't do that. So I think that that's, I think that we need to take away some of that stigma. And I also think that a lot of being a composer is having others hear your music. And I think that we need to be more open to people sharing their music and having their music performed, because I feel like part of the reason that we have this mystique about composers is that a lot of, at least in the United States, a lot of our institutions are not open to people that are what I call living composers and not decomposing composers. And so a lot of times you'll see these programs, and these are great programs. And of course, I love Tchaikovsky and I love Stravinsky. Um, but it's what, 2018 now, and it's going to be 2019, and we're already 20 years into the 21st century. Like, we shouldn't be sitting there going, oh, I played some, our symphony just played something from 1935. We're so current. Imagine if the medical profession was like, hey, they used to do this in 1885 and we're doing it now. Imagine if if the medical community acted like the classical community sometimes. And to their credit, I think a lot of organizations, especially a lot of smaller ensembles, have been created to promote new music. And so you'll have groups of musicians that are like, hey, I play violin, I play percussion, I play, piano, and, let's write something for ourselves. Let's ask other composers to write things for us. Let's just create something, and they'll go out and they'll do it. And because of the internet now, they don't necessarily need to have the support of a giant arts organization. They can actually do it on their own. So I think that while at least in the United States, some of the bigger organizations are struggling financially and things like that, there are lots and lots and lots of little ensembles, people just doing all kinds of things. And you can find them on the internet. You can buy their albums, you can go to their concerts, and you can support new music. So I think that's kind of cool too.
Terrific. Yeah, there was so much I loved about this book when it came out, and still do. And I think the two major things that stick in my head were that you have designed it to be completely accessible. So yes, it's useful for the trained musician who wants to learn about composing properly, but it's also something that, as you say, anyone who has just a little bit of musical training, even just instrument playing, can pick it up and start creating, start composing, and start to feel like, yes, this is something I could do. And the other thing is, you, as you always do, bring in a lot of the practicalities. Like you just talked there about opportunities to get new music heard. And the book also touches on things like, how do you market music, or how do you get your music out there, and how do you find opportunities that it can be performed, which I think is really valuable too, so that you're not just sitting in your bedroom scribbling on a piece of paper and hoping it's a good composition.
Exactly. Well, I think that actually, when I was in college, actually University of South Florida, that was actually one of the things I realized. I had a semester where I think I wrote like a dozen pieces, and out of the dozen pieces, I don't know, I think a handful got performed. And because, college kids, we write for each other. You're like, oh, hey, I'm a percussionist. I'm a composer, and you're a bassoonist. Let me write something for you. And so I know that it was one of those things that, we just kind of were trying to, but it didn't always work out. And so at that point in my career, which I was just in college, I just said, you know what? From now on, I'm not writing a piece unless I know that there is a performance, a concert, there's a concert date for it. And so, and I know that that's kind of, it doesn't mean that you don't have to write music and assume that it's never going to have a concert date, but it was more of a thing that, what is the point? It's like if you write a novel and then you keep it in your drawer and you just leave it there and you're like, I wrote a novel, and nobody ever reads it. You never know what the audience thinks. You don't know if it was good or bad or needs help, or should you do a sequel? Should you keep doing this, or should you just go ahead and do something else? And so I feel like for musicians that are exploring creating music, have other people listen. I know it's embarrassing sometimes. I know for myself, it's hard for me to have a half-finished piece shown, because I'm like, okay, well, I don't think this is finished yet, but what do you think about this? And then just kind of have their input on it. But I think it's really important that if you are creating music, that you have it performed. And so when I was in college, I started setting concert dates. And in fact, I remember I had a lesson with my professor, and he was like, Sabrina, I was like, yes. He says, can you please come in here one day without a finished composition that has a concert date? I was like, what? He's like, yes. Every time you come in here, you're like, yeah, I wrote this and it's being performed next week. And I'm like, well, yes. And he's just like, no. So he actually forced me to write this piece that is still unfinished and has never been performed. He forced me to slow down my writing process extremely slow, to where it was just nitpicky, and I still have sketches that I managed to orchestrate. I started as a piano piece, and then I orchestrated it into like 5 to 10 parts, and it still needs to be finished, and it just sits there. It's never been it's my unfinished piece, and it's probably a masterpiece, but yeah. My professor also forced us to write everything by hand. He didn't let us turn in scores by computer because he said that too many of us were depending on computers to write our music, which I think is kind of an interesting thought. That I think that it's important that if you're writing music, that you do it with your instrument, your voice, and a paper and pencil, and start there. Because it is very easy to go into a songwriting program and just go, that sounds good. Copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, copy paste. The end. And so it's and by forcing his students to sit down and actually write everything painstakingly out, no matter how long the piece was, whew, it was a lot of work. Of course, then later on, I had to transcribe it into music notation because nobody takes handwritten scores anymore. And so I'd have these pieces that are really great pieces that I had to sit and go, now I have to transcribe this. So, but yeah, I don't know. It was kind of crazy. So.
And coming back to music technology then, you took on this major project, Libertaria, where you weren't just composing an opera, which presumably you didn't do entirely with pencil and paper. Did you allow yourself a computer?
I actually did allow myself a computer, but I don't know if I have it right next to me. I don't think so. It might be back there. I actually have a journal. It's like this thick, and it has a lot of the musical ideas. I keep trying to think if it's around here. Usually I keep it close by, but right now, if you saw my station, it's a disaster. Anyway, but yeah, I would go ahead and I'd have Nate would watch my daughter, my husband would watch my daughter, and then I'd go to the coffee shop and I'd just sit there and for a couple hours just write down lyrics, write down the libretto, write down how I want the film to go in terms of a storyboard, musical ideas. I would, try to take moments here and there and write down melodies. A lot of times when I write a piece of music, I will sketch out a kind of a graphic notation kind of idea version of it. So I'll have like a melody and then I'll start trying chicken scratch, and lots of times it does look like chicken scratch. It's just like a bunch of scribbles and then like a section that'll say really big here. And then like, a decrescendo and then like, maybe in parenthesis, flute maybe, question mark, and that kind of a thing. So I'll have these massive, graphic notation things that I understand what they mean. Nobody else in their right mind ever would. And then I take those and I would take those into the computer. Now, the challenge was that for these, not everybody that was on my cast could read music. So not only did I have to have like scores and click tracks, what the click track would allow the singers to sing right in time to the score. So just be a click, click, click. I also had to have the piano parts play what the musicians were going to sing, because some of them would just listen to the piano part and then sing their song, which was fine, except that once in a while, I'm human, and I went ahead and I would have a wrong note in there, and I'd get the recording back, and I'm like, what happened there? And then I'm like, oh, that was my fault. Yeah, okay, we'll just tweak that. So, but yeah, so it was challenging because essentially, I kind of had to go from sketches, then from sketches to like a more, musical kind of a sketch with the piano. Usually I write a piano part out first, and I'll do it within the program. I did work in Logic. So I'll work within Logic and I'll have the piano part. Then I start orchestrating it down. And then I had to figure out, obviously the lyrics and the rhythm of the lyrics and everything like that. And then I have to go ahead and give them the click track with the piano part. Then I'd have to take their version without any music and then kind of mix it in, and then we had the final master at the end of everything, and then I keep adding instruments and making it more complicated because there was a lot of sound synthesis in the whole thing, and stuff like that. So it was just this really crazy process where, it wasn't just like one stage of pencil and paper. It's like it started pencil and paper and then it went into the computer and then it went another stage, and it was like probably like every song went through like 6 to 10 stages before it got to its final version. So it was a little crazy.
Yeah, but I think having heard you talk a bit about composing there and what it means to you and how people should think about it, it's maybe a notch less staggering to hear you talk about a project like Libertaria, because people understand, okay, it's a step-by-step process. Composing doesn't mean, immediately writing down your note-perfect orchestra score. It can be an organic thing. It might still be a bit of a leap for them to understand how you were able to take that composer's mindset and also take on this mantle of filmmaking, which I think in a lot of people's eyes is a completely different art form. What was that like for you? Had you done much film work? You had animation, obviously, in the Creation Oratorio before that.
Right. Well, when I was at University of South Florida, I actually had wanted to go to film school and I got rejected. So I had started, so I actually had started doing, gosh, I want to say I had started doing like experimental films, like the kind that you see that you're like, what was that? Why was that? What were they thinking? And these were things that, I mean, I have them up on YouTube and I'm just like, oh, I remember, I mean, just crazy pieces that, some of them made sense, some of them didn't. And then, so I got my master's in music technology at Florida International University, and I actually went back a year later, and I studied film for a year. So I actually did get to go to film school for at least a year. So yeah, by the time Libertaria came around, I had I'd done dozens of short films. I hadn't done any features. Libertaria is my first and my only feature that I've done myself, where I've directed it, I've produced it, I've written it. I've worked on other people's features. I've written music for features, but this is the only one that's like my film that is a feature. And so it was my first feature film. Obviously it was my first, I would say it's my first opera. I did an operetta. It's like a lost piece of music. Like there's like a sheet of it somewhere and I don't know what happened to it. And I totally forgot I even had it. And then I found it one day and I was like, oh, that's right. I wrote an operetta once. Anyway, but so they have, so it was my first opera, I would say, but I had already done like an oratorio. I've written a lot of choral music before then. So it does seem like a different process, but for me, I had learned how to do video editing. And for me, video editing is very similar to audio engineering. You're moving around images instead of moving around sound. And actually, sound plays a massive role in film. Sound design, doing the voice, the dubbing, the recording audio, the dialogue. It's actually, you would be surprised how much, if you know how to audio edit, how much you could do film. Because really, it's just a matter of like, oh, now I've got images in there. And obviously, the images have to be good. But, if you have a cinematographer, they can, do the images and you can just drop them in. So it actually isn't that far of a leap. If somebody knows how to do a little bit of music processing software, music editing software, even GarageBand, moving over to video editing actually is not that difficult. Now, the whole process of creating a film is different, I think, than music. Because, for instance, with music, let's say I come up with a melody and I'm like, oh, it's a really cool melody. And maybe I repeat it a few times, add some lyrics, maybe, we add some sort of instrumentation to it and it's done. But with a film, you can't just sit there and go, hey, what if I wrote a story about a dog and a boy? And that's all it was. Like you have to have an arc. You definitely have to like think it through. There's expectations that I think are different than there are in music. I think people are willing to listen to some pretty strange music and they're like, yeah. But if you have a film that doesn't make any sense, you're just sitting there going, why did I pay for that? Why am I here? Like, So to me, I had already done stuff. So it wasn't like it was new. And at one point in my life, I had wanted to be a filmmaker. And actually, when I was really young, I had wanted to be a writer. And I have a stack of rejection letters there too, like this big. Because I wrote really awful stories and thought I could get them published when I was in high school. I was like, yeah, this is a really great story. It's rejected. Why? And so that's the funny thing. Like you always think that people do these great big projects, but you don't see how many failures are like stacked up behind them. Like there's like this many failures and then there's like this one thing that worked. And so anyway, but yeah, so it was kind of, it wasn't actually that big of a leap for me. It was actually more of a natural transition. And that's why I think it's interesting that now, I think, I'm kind of, I'm going more into filmmaking and I'm still writing music. I'm still composing. I'm still video editing. I'm still audio editing and doing other things. But I am finding that, now I'm working on film more and actually getting people together to do films. And so, and I've helped produce a few films now at this point because I guess I was really good at getting people together and now I'm trying to experiment with that in just like film. So that kind of thing.
Gotcha. And I'm sure at this point in the conversation, listeners won't be shocked to hear that you've actually written a book to help people who are in that situation of
Yes,
feeling intimidated by filmmaking. And so tell us a bit about Filmmaking Crash Course and who it's for.
Well, the filmmaking crash course is definitely meant for people that are just beginning to do film. I would say, it's actually funny that a lot of Buffalo, New York has a very big film community, and it's an independent film community. It's not like Hollywood, it's not like Bollywood, it's not like New York City. So it's definitely a lot of people working together. Everybody has families and jobs and real lives, and then they just get together on the weekends and they create these crazy projects. And so what I noticed was that there were people that were like, I want to do a film, but I have no idea how. And so what I did was I kind of just put together a list of exercises that I was teaching. I actually do a filmmaker boot camp now where 6 weeks they create a film. So we've done 3 films so far. And our last film was called Welcome to Space Force. And it was done at the Buffalo Dreams Fantastic Film Festival, which I think it was incredible that, this crazy thing we did over the summer in 6 weeks, was actually shown to a bunch of people at a film festival. I'm like, wow, that's incredible. But really, it was just, seeing people in the community that are like, I want to do this, but I have no idea how. Maybe they're a writer and they don't know how to act, or they don't know how to direct, they don't know how to produce. Maybe they're a director that doesn't know how to write. Maybe they're a director who can't act, or somebody doesn't know how to do sound, or somebody doesn't know how to do cinematography. And so I just kind of took the basics and I kind of compiled it all into one book. And actually, I'm using this book right now for my boot camp class, and then I'm also I'm teaching a film class to teenagers. And so they're working on next semester, we'll be just doing this massive sci-fi film. I don't know if it's going to work out. We have to have giraffes and goats. So apparently somebody has a friend at the zoo, so we might actually get the giraffes. But anyway, so yeah, we'll see what happens. But really, it's really meant for beginners. My composer boot camp is really meant for anybody. It's beginner, intermediate, advanced. I would say filmmaking crash course is great if you're a beginner, or if you're intermediate, or even if you've done filmmaking for a while, but maybe you want to get better at, like, say, writing specifically. There's a lot of writing prompts because I'm a writer as well, and so I've written for a long time, and so there's a lot of writing prompts as well. A lot of this stuff are things that, people have taught me, and then I just kind of elaborated on. A lot of these exercises that, my professors gave to me, my teachers gave to me. I remember Paul over at University of South Florida, one of his most infamous assignments was that in a week you had to write 10 short compositions. They were short compositions, but they had to be entirely different from each other. They couldn't even be remotely the same. And everybody would spend like 30 hours that week just writing, and he wouldn't let us use a computer. So we had to write it all out, and we're writing it all out, and they had to be totally different from each other. They could be nothing the same. And so you just give them this, and I remember I didn't even get 10 done. I think I got like 8 done. And I went over there and I was like, here are my pieces. And then he sat there and just put them all out. And he says, well, from this, I could tell you do this all the time, and you do this all the time. You need to stop doing that. And like, you're sitting there going, what? And so, it's things like that where, you take ideas like that, and you just kind of expand on some of those ideas. I mean, I wouldn't, honestly, if somebody was very serious at composition and they wanted to write 10 pieces in a week, I mean, God bless them. But, you don't really have to do something like that. But it is, challenging yourself and saying, okay, well, I know how to write for piano, or I can, I can jam on my guitar. Well, what if I jam on my guitar and I write some lyrics? I've never done that before, and just kind of challenging yourself to that next step. So, the filmmaking crash course essentially has a lot of exercises that are really, really great for filmmakers that are just kind of at that beginning level to intermediate level, and that kind of thing. I do want to expand on it in the future, especially with the audio section. Everything's really introductory, but I kind of feel like since I am a composer, I can probably expand even more in that section than I did. But this was just kind of like I wanted to make sure I got something out there that we could use right away, so the filmmaking community can use this right away.
Yeah, and I love that. Like with Composer Bootcamp, you've made it highly practical. This is not a textbook of theory. No. This is exercises to start doing right away. It's very cool.
Exactly. Well, I think that a lot of times, especially with composition, you can get bogged down by the theory. It becomes very, very daunting and stressful. And people pay lots of money to take classes specifically on this theory. And it's not that it's not important. It is very important. But it doesn't mean that you can't start writing even if you don't know it. And I think that it's to take away the roadblocks, I think is the point, is to take away the roadblocks.
Tremendous. So I'm sure everyone listening now understands why I am constantly impressed and astonished by the range of projects and the scale of projects you do. Tell us a little bit about the latest. You were recently awarded a prestigious fellowship by the Cintas Foundation. Tell us a bit about that.
The Cintas Foundation hands out fellowships for visual artists and architects and composers of Cuban descent. And they have been doing this for decades. And I was very fortunate. I received it actually very recently. I went down to Miami and I received a fellowship. With the fellowship, now I'm going to be able to buy some much needed equipment It kind of, because you receive a monetary award with the fellowship. And what's nice about it is that I'm going to be able to upgrade some things. I'm going to be able to move forward on some projects that I would not have been able to, not because I wouldn't want to, but, like everybody else, I have, I have obligations to my family that I need to do. And I have certain things that I have to do, as in work. I'm a writer now. So, I have clients that I have to write for and things, but this allows me to kind of have the time and the breathing room to say, okay, well, now I can move forward with some of these projects that I really wanted to do, but I couldn't because I didn't have the equipment. And so what I'm going to be doing with it is I'm going to be buying myself equipment for mainly for filmmaking. So I'm going to buy myself a high grade camera, and I'm going to buy myself the gear that goes with that, as well as buying sound recording equipment for on site at a film. Because right now I have a production studio set up in my living room, but I don't have what I need to record good audio for film projects. And because I'm moving more in that direction, that is one of the things that's kind of preventing me from going to the next level with what I want to do. So I want to do, like I said, I want to do another opera, children's opera. It's loosely based off of Alice in Wonderland. It's called Alicia. And it's set slightly in the future in New York, and it's got more of a Latino flair to it. And so I have that, and the libretto for that is mostly written. And so I need to kind of start working on that. But I needed a camera for that because I want to try to do some live action and animation mixed together. I'm kind of moving away from animation in terms of just doing animated pieces, although I am finishing up a project called Spiritus, which is an animated film that it's a sci-fi film I've been working on for like 2.5 years, and I'm hoping to finish it up by spring is the hope. So, but yeah, so the Cintas Foundation awarded me this fellowship. It was amazing. It was at an art gallery down at University of Miami, and there were hundreds of people there, and it was nice. It was amazing for me because, sometimes you get caught up in life and you kind of feel like, oh, I'm not doing anything. I'm not, you kind of get down on yourself and you're like, oh my gosh, and then and just to, to have people say, okay, well, here, we think you deserve this. It just, and it comes at a time in my life where I really felt like the last 2 or 3 years I've just been busy with, I had a baby and been dealing with toddler, things, and just being a parent. And it was just really neat to see that, okay, well, I can still be a composer and still be a parent and still, that balance in life. And stuff. So it just came at a really good time where I think I was starting to get kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing. And, as a musician, so excuse me, that kind of thing.
Wonderful. Well, I think you managed to accomplish more when feeling like you're not doing anything than most people manage at full speed. But I'm sure everyone, like I am, is feeling inspired by the fact that even to you, from the outside looking like that, from the inside, there is still that voice in your head. There is still that sense that you're not achieving your fullest. There is still a desire to do more. And I'm sure there's a lot that we can all learn from that. Sabrina, tell us, where can people go to stay up to date with the latest on these projects we've been talking about and to find links to your books and Libertaria?
Okay, well, Libertaria, you could just go to either Amazon, IMDb, or you can go to YouTube. And it's Libertaria, the virtual opera. And just all you have to do is look for it and it'll be there. If you want to go ahead and get Composer Bootcamp, Songwriting 101, which is also, it's a songwriting version of the Composer Bootcamp. So if you're just interested in vocal writing, you can look at Songwriting 101. And also the Filmmaking Crash Course. They're all available at Amazon and barnesandnoble.com. And you can also go to my website, which is sabrinapeñayoung.wordpress.com. I'm going to get something shorter at some point this year, but I haven't done it yet. So, and that's SabrinaPeñayoung.wordpress, WordPress.com. So anyway, I'm sure that there'll be links below the podcast or whatever that'll be helpful. And then I'm also on Facebook, and I'm also under a New Music Composer at Facebook, or you can just look me up, Sabrina Peña Young. You'll find me on Facebook. And if you join me on Facebook, you'll get the latest projects. You'll get the latest information about upcoming books. I have sales coming up for Christmas time, and all kinds of things, and all the projects that are coming up, and just, anything else that I might be doing, like speaking engagements and things like that as well. So you can find me on Facebook. So that's also another great place to get a hold of me.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, yes, as you say, we will definitely have links to all of those in the show notes for
Yeah.
this episode. And all that
Yeah.
remains is to say a huge thank you. It's been such a pleasure on a personal as well as professional level to have this chance to sit down and chat at length and learn more about the backstory because, as I
Mhm.
said, I've wanted to solve this mystery of where Sabrina came from and how she manages to do everything that she does. And I feel like I've got a little bit of insight on that now, and it's
A little
certainly
bit, just a little bit.
a little bit. And so I know that our listeners will be taking a lot away from this too. A huge thank you for
Good.
joining us on the show today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
Oh, hey, one more thing. If you enjoyed this video, please take a second to like it on YouTube. And if you haven't already, please also subscribe to our channel there. That's going to help make sure you get all our latest videos as soon as they come out. And it also helps us reach more people, which means more episodes, better guests, and everybody wins. So please take a second to like this video and hit subscribe.